All right, we're live. It looks like the mustache intro isn't going to work like I wanted it to, and I don't know why. That's really upsetting. Uh, oh well. Hey Dan,
Hello, Jim.
I must ask you a question.
Okay.
First of all, who are you and why are you in my channel?
I volunteered. You were looking for
That's
a
right.
Christian
That's
apologist
right.
to interview for your show. I didn't know I would be talking to both a mustache and you. So like you're the co-host and the mustache is like the anchor, or the mustache is the co-host, however that works. But I was intrigued.
Yeah, it's
And
a
so
it's a package deal. It's both of us
it
or
is.
none of us.
Oh, that's great. So I volunteered on Twitter and here I am.
Well, Daniel,
And I
I'm,
found out
I'm
in volunteering you are reading our book.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you'd come on, especially that since I had been reading your book. Speaking of your book, you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it came out in July. It is called The Story of the Cosmos. In a brief nutshell, it is a lifelong passion of mine to sort of give a Christian voice back to the heavens and to present an intelligent, multifaceted view of the universe that includes not just science, but literature, history, art, and philosophy, a well-rounded interdisciplinary approach to the universe that's not just narrowly scientific. So we think, in some sense, that it begins to answer Carl Sagan. Because I don't think since 1980 that the church has really had a sort of a response to the creativity and the appeal that Carl Sagan had about bringing the heavens down to earth. And so this is kind of a small attempt at communicating the heavens in a more holistic and robust, theologically rich, imaginatively rich, scientifically rich way of looking at the universe.
This is kind of a compilation, right? It's like a chicken soup for the Christian apologist soul.
I suppose we tried not to make it standard apologetic fare by that where it's not loaded down with syllogisms. It's more of an imaginative. It combines imagination and reason, science and theology. It brings together different things that maybe you might not think would fit together well. So yes, there are Christian apologists in the book, but each of our chapters tells a story, and rather than an argument per se, a formal argument, the argument is presented in a sort of more of in a story form. So each essay tells a little bit of a story, and they all kind of work together. And we're from all different Christian backgrounds, which is really nice. And our centerpiece scripture is Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. So we all, basically the gist of it was we asked a bunch of people to write an essay about Psalm 19, and this is what we got. And so it really came together very well. We have Catholics and Protestants, we have Presbyterians and Baptists and non-denominational people, and all backgrounds. That really, it was really a nice effort, I think, that came together well.
Absolutely, and you have some pretty prestigious names on there. You have a William Lane Craig. You have some astronomers, some physicists, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we have pretty much, as far as I know, we have some big voices in the cosmological game. Bill Craig, Dr. William Lane Craig, Guillermo Gonzalez, Luke Barnes. So Dr. Luke Barnes is a world-renowned fine tuning specialist. He's a cosmologist who lives in Australia. He works with Sean Carroll and other people. He's a high level professional in that regard.
Right,
Guillermo
you got
Gonzalez,
Sarah Salviander and
Sarah
David
Salviander.
Bradstreet.
Mhm. Yeah, David Bradstreet is a binary star expert. He's been studying binary stars for decades. Sarah Salviander became a Christian through her study in astrophysics.
And
She was
studying
an
black
atheist.
holes, correct?
Yeah, she was a Canadian atheist, raised in an atheist home, and she tells her story in the book. So yeah, we have astrophysicists, we have literary scholars, we have a philosopher, and we have a couple of lay people. Wayne and myself are sort
Hmm.
of the lay voice in this as well, because a lot of times, at least part of what I think is important is that the heavens can be communicable to a wider audience. Everybody knows what they are, and everybody should be able to have a say. And so we hope to encourage the laity, and that's who this book was addressed to, more of a lay audience, a wider audience that's wants to know more in depth about how what would be a 21st century response, Christian response to the state of cosmology and astronomy today, and how does it affect me down here? What do I care about planets and stars and everything, and what does it matter? So we try to incorporate purpose teleology, meaning scripture, theology, philosophy, all kinds of stuff thrown together for a nice mix, I think.
So that's a good kicking off point. Why do the planets and the stars matter from a from your theological perspective?
Well, if I can, excuse me, if I can start with, I'm a literary person, so I start with Homer here. From about the 8th century, you have this from the Iliad in Book 18.
Oh, are you putting the slides up? Are you doing the slides right now? I
Yeah,
think.
I
Okay, I
did you
think I forgot to put them up. Give me 1 second. I'll have those right up.
no
I'm so
problem.
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I should have asked.
Anyways,
So briefly, the short answer is, as a Christian, I believe they reflect God's glory, God's workmanship, his beauty, his splendor, his intelligence, his power, his might. Because a lot of times I think we, like in modern cosmology, we take what has generally been attributed to God. And I think over the last 5 centuries, the church has sort of unintentionally just sort of had a garage sale of its terms and concepts. And science was willing to come by and buy our vocabulary for a couple of bucks. And so now what we have is sort of cosmology with, couched in monotheistic terms. We speak of a singularity. From the singularity comes laws. The singularity comes from something that must have been infinite or eternal in the past. But science, eternality and infinities and concepts like that are not finally empirically scientific. So there's still a sort of monotheistic holdover in how we describe the cosmos. There's still beauty and wonder to it. But in the modern sense, I think because we can't see the stars, people are cut off from actually viewing them in most major cities, that we just don't see them as important. We just don't see them as the handiwork of God. We just don't see their beauty. We just don't see their splendor. We don't feel connected to it. It's either like hardcore astrology or hardcore science, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of in between or any sort of real way to derive meaning from what we're looking at. So our desire was to re-enchant, to use that word, I guess, to re-enchant people's minds with the idea that the one who has forged the heavens is aware of us as well, and his my thesis in my chapter is that it's not necessarily a force that moves everything in the heavens. It's God's love, and so it's part of the way in which traditionally Christian Orthodox theology has conveyed the truth of God's existence through the books of creation and the book of Scripture, 2 books. And so we're taking the sort of the book of creation approach and talking about what we mean as Christians by how the heavens declare the glory of God and how they're meaningful for us. I derive a lot of personal encouragement from thinking of God as I stargaze. It's just a wonderful connection. It calms me down. I was doing it this morning. I did it last night, learning new star names this season. It's just a wonderful meditative, contemplative, worshipful experience for me. And I hope to pass that joy along to people.
yeah, it's something that I really enjoy myself and get a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction from. I grew up in the country, so I grew up being able to see and appreciate the stars for their magnitude, something that you don't get um, the the sheer impact of until you can see it
Right.
without light pollution.
Right.
And
It's
then I
absolutely.
went for, most of my young adult life, whether in the military or in the city. And I was always somewhere with heavy light pollution and never got to see it. But now that I'm back in the country again, it's
Mm,
just so great just to, be able to go out and just see Venus and
mm.
Jupiter and Mars even on a good night.
Oh my goodness, yes. Last night and this morning was so cool, Jim, because last night Saturn and well, they've been up. Saturn and Jupiter are up, and the Milky Way splits them right now where they are. The Milky Way just goes right down
Right
the
in the
center of
middle.
where they
Yeah.
are,
That was
right in the
it's a
middle.
spiral arm. One of the spiral arms
Yeah,
goes right through there.
right. And then this morning, the I can't do justice to describe it here on the podcast thing, but this morning, the arm, the way the Earth rotates, the way we move and orbit the sun, the arm of the Milky Way was going from southwest or southeast to northwest. So it was going one direction last night and one direction this morning, and it made an X pattern across that. And if you observe this over time, you can see why the ancient people made boundary stones and markers and things, because they were observing the positions of the stars in the heavens as they didn't have TV, they didn't have internet, they just had dark skies. And so they were very much aware of what was going on. But it's so much fun to reconnect, to see after the passage of time, to see the motions of stars, to be able to recognize where they are, to be able to name them. I have a repertoire in my head of about 50 I can name by sight, all the bright ones. And now I'm going for the dimmer ones this season to try to name and locate them.
Hmm.
And it's just a wonderful meditative, contemplative exercise that just gives me peace here. Do you have the screen up?
Yeah, yeah.
Can
So
you
I
see?
have it up. So
Okay.
I'm looking at a looks like a congregation or some sort of a meeting.
Yeah, this is the genesis of our book.
Is this some
This happened.
multi-level marketing stuff? Are they selling us some timeshares?
Yeah, no, not at all. This was we brought together in March of 2018. This is where the book began. At Swibbits, Swibbits Southwestern
Hmm.
Baptist. We brought together a Hubble Space Telescope and Michael Ward, who's in the book. Michael talked about Lewis, and Dr. Kokomore talked about Hubble. Dr. Kokomore has been with Hubble for over 20 years. He's a Christian, and so he talked about the universe, his job, Hubble imagery, and then Michael talked about C.S. Lewis and Narnia and Planet Narnia. So we had over 200 people there. It was we just advertised it through radio and podcasting and handing out flyers in churches. And we had over 200 people there, and it was pin drop silent when Dr. Kokomore was speaking about the universe. And from this event, Paul Gould and I birthed. It was Paul's idea, but the book. He took this event, told the book publisher that, hey, this was really exciting. People were really excited about it. Let's get this book done, and we had a contract. So this is where it began.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And that right there is what my heart is, just to put a daughter in a dad's lap and get them interested in stars and stories again. And that was so touching to see kids there, and adults and grandpas and grandmas and all kinds of people from all over the place. It was really cool.
Oh no, I think I disappeared. Oh wait,
He's,
am I back? What is going on here? What'd you do, Daniel? What'd you do,
am I
Daniel?
still there? Am I gone?
I don't know. You messed something up. I don't know. You messed
Did I?
something up.
Should I get out of the screen?
No, 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 no.
Oh,
I'm just messing. Uh,
oh,
let's
are
see.
we off the feed?
I don't know what I did. No, 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 no. I'm just messing. Uh, let's see. I don't know what I did wrong. Well, okay, so I'm just gonna have to change cameras real quick. Anyway, so
No
so so,
problem.
so sorry
No
about
problem.
that. So
No,
continue.
take care of what you have
Well,
to
okay,
take
so
care
I'm
of.
just gonna have to change cameras real quick.
Do you
Anyway,
need
so
to
so
pause?
so, so
No,
sorry
no,
about
no,
that.
no.
So
Please, please
continue.
take. So, and then this was a picture from the summer. This was a packed. Grand Canyon has a star party every summer, and this was from June, and there were 400 people just in this auditorium. But they fill a particular parking lot at the South Rim, I think, and then they just have people come out with their telescopes, and they just do star parties. I mean, people are hungry to see dark skies. People are
Yeah.
excited. People, and it touches everybody: kids, adults, old guys, young guys, gals, moms, dads. It touches
Yeah.
everybody,
Oh,
Jim.
I agree. My oldest daughter is 9 years old, and she's been fortunate enough to be, exposed to it just because it's something that I'm passionate about. And
Yeah,
she was wanted to be an astronomer for as long as I can remember. I mean, she never wanted
that's
to be
awesome.
a ballerina or a firefighter or anything. She's wanted to be an astronomer.
That's fantastic.
She started off saying she wanted to be an astrologer, and I was like, probably want to rethink that maybe a little.
Let me back up and explain what that is. But you've probably seen one of these, Jim. This is a sky blindness map. They put out the various star associations put these out, but white is basically sky blindness. This is Dallas Fort Worth, and under the white you can see maybe a handful of stars,
Like less than 1% of the visible stars.
Right. So when you get out into the blue, and as you go outward, you get blue, and then you get gray. You get up into Oklahoma and West Texas, you start getting into grayer areas, but you can see more and more stars on a gold tier International Dark Sky Association dark sky site, a gold tier site. You can theoretically see 3,000 stars by sight.
Oh, easy.
Yeah. That's the count that I've heard, but this is the unfortunate situation in most large metropolises. It just looks like somebody spit on the Metroplex, and it's light pollution. I have a friend of mine who runs savingourstars.org, and she does her part in the DFW area to try to get light pollution reduced in the relative areas, and it's a much needed effort, and it's a pretty easy fix. It's just getting communities and governments to change their minds about how they spend money on lighting. But that's just an example of where we all are at. If you live in a major metropolis, it's Dallas is relatively small speaking, but the bigger your city, the worse that sky blindness is.
That's so true.
Here's New York.
I moved from Keller. I was just just north of Fort Worth, and it was awful.
Right, and this is of course this Times Square. You can't see a single star in the sky.
Right. It's just
I wonder why.
Right, and it's not even actually ever dark.
No, it's not. It's not. So that's just where most of us are. We just don't see the stars. They don't enter our minds. And then when we get out from underneath them, some people literally freak out. Like, what is all that above us,
So I just want to acknowledge some of my favorite people real quick in the chat, if you don't mind. I got Christy Santiago, and thank you so much for coming. Iron Charioteer, No Name. Let's see, we got Rhonda. Hey, Rhonda, thank you so much for coming. Easism, love having you here as always. Thank you so much for coming. Tones, what's up, Tones Malones? And let's see who else we got. Steven, but Steven Steen, right?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
No, maybe no, I don't. Doesn't ring a bell.
He's trouble. You don't want to talk.
Okay.
You don't want to talk with him. And Mr. Shadow Kitty, thank you all so much for joining the stream. This is good stuff. We're gonna be getting into some really cool things, and he is going way too fast. I can't even read that. All right, Dan. Sorry about that. Let's pick up where we left off.
Sure. What would you like to talk about?
Well, so
I don't want to.
I'm particularly interested in a couple of. And I'm particularly interested in people's theological beliefs that tend to differ even within the same belief structure. I'm of the mind that you can't walk into a church and grab any 5 individuals and sit them down and question them on fundamental aspects of their religion, and them agree. So I'm just always interested in what other people believe, especially with your position being the co-editor, contributor, and what else are you? You're co-editor, contributor, and something else.
I did the front essay, the intro, and the afterword. I built the index, and then I edited everything. And then Paul was the chief editor.
Wow.
So he edited, gave it to me. I gave it back to him. We didn't really have to do everything because most everybody except for myself has been published. So really, the only essay that really needed work was mine. But we go ahead.
What is your background in? What were your studies?
Okay. So I did my master's degree. I have an education degree with a minor in English, and I taught English and Bible at middle and high school, and math and history and stuff. And then I got my master's degree in cultural apologetics at Houston Baptist University, just to study under Michael Ward and do my thesis on C.S. Lewis. And so my master's thesis was very esoteric, but it was just something I did for fun. What's the relevance of Planet Narnia? I did my thesis on Michael's book. What's the relevance for if Michael, his thesis is true, if what Lewis was doing in Narnia was true, what's the relevance of Lewis's imaginative cosmology in Narnia for us today? And so his challenge to me was for my master's thesis, if Planet Narnia is true, if what I said Lewis is doing in Narnia is true, what relevance does that have for us? And so that lit me up and really lit a fire to get that program, the Hubble and Narnia together, and then to get this book with Paul. It just really kind of took off. And so my desire was to reignite the conversation about the universe and not just make it a scientific conversation, but to make it something that is accessible for people like me that shop at Aldi's. I mean, that's where the conversation needs to have, because that's where the popular level appeal is for astronomy. Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, anything you watch on Discovery channels. So I just thought we needed a Christian voice in the arena of the universe again. And my background enabled me to get this book, and I hope to go back to teaching soon. I don't know if I'll do that, or if this book will turn into something else, or I continue with my apologetics course and doing podcasting and stuff. I don't know yet, but education and teaching are what I hope to do. And I'm trying to make this book into a college course right now, just writing a schematic and getting videos done for a book study.
So how'd you go from English to apologetics to astronomy? That's I mean, for most people, that's quite the leap.
I see them all going together, Jim. I always have loved astronomy. I was 12 years old when I watched Cosmos, and when it came out, and I've always loved stars and looking up at the sky. And I'm an adult convert to Christianity, so I came to Christ when I was in my late 20s, and so immediately my brain was asking all kinds of questions about the relevance of Scripture. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for our culture? What is this book saying? Who is Jesus? How do I react? So then I talked to you before we turned the mic on about Ken Myers, the Mars Hill Audio Journal. So I did a lot of intellectual exploring and had to basically disciple myself for the first several years of my Christian walk. But then I really began to see the integration of how things fit together. If, Colossians 1, if Jesus is by him and for him and through him, all things have been made, and he upholds all things by the word of his power. In Hebrews 1:3, if that's true, then how does it all fit together? Of course, I knew I wasn't going to get all the answers to every question that I had, but I really began to see imaginatively how things could at least possibly fit together. And so I loved to bring things together that you might not think would necessarily fit together. So it's a creative and imaginative sort of conceptualization to be able to weave astronomy in English. Because, when we talk about astronomy, it's communicated through words. I mean, astronomy is a very visual discipline, but it's also very, you communicate it through books and writing. Mm-hmm. So there's a visual, there's a written, there's a mathematical. And then I have a couple of slides here that, I don't know if you can see the slides anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, here's some of the fine-tuning constants of the universe. So there's the mathematical side to the universe. These are protons. These are quarks. So there's a very mathematical and physical side to things. But then, of course,
when you say fine tuning, as far as like quarks and stuff go, what do you mean?
I just mean that the physical sciences today, to the length that we can discover these kinds of things, that what science and physics has uncovered about the universe, that is relatively only in the last 100 years or so that we've known certain mathematical truths about the universe because of our ability to recognize things, quantum and quarks and things. So I just use that just to show that there is a tremendous amount of wonderful science behind the study of the universe. But there's also, of course, and here's some expenditures that we've had over the last several decades about studying the universe. I mean, billions of dollars, tons of jobs. It's just the expenditures themselves tell us something. If I ask you, Jim, to give me $600 million for a project, you're going to want to know what I'm doing. My investors are going to want to know what I'm doing with the money. What are you going to do with $600 million, Dan?
Well, unless somebody just launched Sputnik and then they really don't care. They're just like, just do something.
Yes, if you're just going to launch, but I think, and I nothing that I'm saying tonight, do I come at this from thinking that anything that I'm saying is proving my position? I'm sharing my position rather than necessarily trying to prove it. I think hard proof, if you want to prove triangles, you still have to assume angles. And if you want to do Euclidean geometry, you can do those kinds of proofs. But and nothing I say I don't mean to come at it from the approach that I'm proving anything, but I think this is one aspect of how we can see, how I see the heavens declaring the glory of God. We're willing to spend this kind of money to study it because we're so fascinated by it. And these are just all the moons of Saturn that we've learned in the last several decades. Of course, Cassini discovered several of them back in the 17th century. There's the Death Star moon of Mimas. I don't know if George Lucas got the inspiration from that or not. But anyway,
I mean,
that's.
to be fair, we spend a lot more on our defense budget.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. I am not
Than we.
arguing. Yeah, I'm not saying the expenditure is a waste. I'm knowing
Oh,
that.
no. Not that it's a waste. I just think that.
It's small.
But it seems like you think that we have our priorities in the
No,
the right place.
Yeah, I think the money spent is fine. I'm excited about this. I can't wait to see what James Webb is going to find out.
I think we should be spending more.
Yeah, I think we could. I would like to. That'd be great. I'm all for it. I think I'm just my only example is that I think the expenditure itself is saying something. That's a worthwhile investment, and it's a hefty one.
I've seen a lot of people go from Christian apologetics to astronomy and to college and work with those kind of complications that somebody with a fundamental, more dogmatic view of the religion would have. But you went from astronomy and higher learning to Christianity, correct?
My Christianity began very simply with a conviction. I was not in any sort of desperate situation. I was not in dire straits. I was not in a bad situation. It was a very gradual sort of thing. And in fact, for a long time, I struggled because I would hear all these wonderful Christian testimonies of people that came out of these horrible situations, and they had these really dramatic testimonies. And mine was more like, hey, the sun rose. And it's like, hey, look, the daylight. And it was as gradual as the sunrise. And I can't even tell you the moment of first light, Jim. It was just such a gradual transition from not knowing who Jesus was to believing Jesus was Lord. And that was before any formal study. I had two convictions that kind of gently landed on me like a bird. One was that Jesus was real and he was God, and that the Bible was his word. And I that came to me out of just like a sunrise. I can't explain it. I still can't explain it. 26 years later, I don't know what exactly technically happened there, but those two convictions got me to read the Bible.
What was the second one? The first one, Jesus was real.
Jesus is God. He was real, a real person, and that he was God. And then the second one was that the Bible was his word. And I'd never even picked up the Bible. I didn't even read page one of it. I didn't think you could read it. If you weren't a Christian, I thought it might harm you if you read it. I kind of treated it like some magic book before I was a Christian.
And but then through like revelation or through somebody else, or
no human being, no extraordinary circumstances, no blinding Damascus road, just a gradual revelation that's God's word and I need to read it. And that's how I began my Christian faith, Jim. And it's like Matthew 16, where Jesus is questioning Peter. Peter, who do you say that I am? And he confesses, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus gives him the blessing, and he says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. So I kind of liken my experience to the Father revealing his Son to me by the Spirit. And I can't give you a technical step-by-step how God would have done that, but that is the genesis of my faith. There was no formal apologetics. There was nobody was pressuring me. Nobody was witnessing to me. There wasn't any outside influence that I could actually say this or that, except I had a girlfriend at the time and we were kind of going to church. I was going to church just to please her, but I wasn't like going to church and really thinking I was going to church to believe it or anything. And I don't even remember anything in the church per se doing anything. Nobody questioned me about it. I broke up with my girlfriend later, and Jesus seemed to stick around. It didn't go away with her,
Jesus,
but it wasn't even her.
Mad.
Yeah. So it was really that gradual. But then through time, and I had some slides up earlier about my testimony about how I've since come to sort of solidify my beliefs, I guess, and learning and growing in personal experience and the history of the church and scriptural studies and all of my formal education, my 2 degrees, my military service, my life experience. all of these things collectively have strengthened my faith over time, and I've certainly matured over time. I'm not finished maturing, but
but all this was like post. Pardon me. All this was post astronomical study, right?
My conversion was before any
Okay.
astronomy. Yeah, so I always had a love of astronomy ever since I was a kid, but my conversion was before any formal education.
So going into astronomy, did you take any presuppositions with you that might have conflicted either with your studies, or did your studies conflict with anything? Did you find anything that you had to reconcile?
Well, when I started my teaching degree, I'd been a Christian for about 5 years. And right as I started my educational degree, I was starting to listen to Mars Hill. And so I was able to contrast the two worldviews, because I got my undergrad degree at a secular college, to be able to contrast the two worldviews that I was learning. One was the secular education point of view, and I took, in my undergrad, in my liberal arts, I took all the sciences that I could. I took biology, geology, astronomy, and physics, just to be conversant in there. Even though I was going to be an English major, I wanted to take hard science as electives because I love science too. And so I learned as much of the secular, I really didn't get a Christian foundation into the sciences formally in my education. It really began at a secular university. And that's what really launched my lay reading on the subject into cosmology and astronomy, and my own quest to understand the heavens biblically. And it was just been a lay love for a long time before I actually formalized it at HBU in 2014.
Where did you derive your cosmological view from initially? Did you from Genesis or from?
Well, it's interesting. Again, it was sort of a confluence of many different influences. You have Carl Sagan. Of course, I was reading scripture and trying to understand that. I was reading cultural apologetics and listening to Mars Hill. I was in church, of course. And listening to friends, watching videos, reading books. There's mostly, if you go to Barnes and Noble, you're just going to get a diet of modern, secular, contemporary science and cosmology. And really, if you want to find a Christian perspective on the universe, you really got to go digging for it. There are good books out there. You just have to go looking for them. But I really felt like there were several different influences. There was literary, there was cultural, there was scientific, there was educational. And then, of course, I learned a lot through my teaching, how to teach to students. You learn a lot about yourself as a teacher.
No doubt.
And so there were several different things. I wouldn't say that it was all, finally, I think it was all, coming from Christ himself, but through these various different facets, through these various different tributaries, my imagination was being fed and learning about myself. And then through suffering too. I've been through a lot of we all have. I'm not championing my sufferings or anything, but that was really a solidifying way in which I could see Christ being faithful to me and persevering with me through the difficulties when I didn't understand things. So I have a hungry brain, and I always wanted to know, and I always wanted to be able to sure I know why I know, or why I think I know. So I'm always investigating. If I can't answer something, I'll go down to the bottom and see if I can answer it. So a lot of my education was self-taught alongside my formal education, which is what I think we all should do. And so while I was doing all my formal education, I was also always doing something on the side. And it's usually astronomy and Christianity that I was always looking into. So I have a collection of writings that I had long before the book was published that I've been just keeping notes on forever. And I just keep adding to it when I find things that are interesting.
So you're quite a bit different than most of the apologists that I normally speak with. I usually speak with the more fundamentals, like the Kant-Hovind type. Do you did you ever, or do you entertain the young Earth creationist position?
I'll tell you what. I first of all, simple answer, no. I let me tell you why, because this is my position currently. I don't hold to an age. I have my podcast co-host, Wayne, is young Earth, but he doesn't see, people think young Earth and they just think militant fundamentalism, street corner megaphone sort of, just a very closed-minded sort of approach to things. There are a lot of YEC people that are not like that at all. And my friend Wayne holds his science with an open hand, and I respect him greatly. And dearly for his soft pedal approach to it, and I find a lot of his insights very intriguing. Of course, so when I worked with the Hubble Space Telescope guy last year, I was giving him a ride to the airport, and he asked me the same question. So, Daniel, are you a young Earth or are you an old Earth? And I'm like, a Hubble Space Telescope scientist is asking me this question. But I found to be very congenial. He was very fatherly about it, and he told me, he says, when I look in the universe, when I look through the telescope, the universe looks old. When I look in the Bible, it looks younger. But my position is that Scripture does not give us a strict chronological age of the universe. I believe in the 6 literal days without committing myself to using the genealogies to justify a particular age of the earth. I don't do that. I don't think that's why the genealogies were written. Could you deduce a younger earth from that? Perhaps. But I think that is it's just not a hill on which I want to die. And I think if you look at the history of science, which I have, you see that scientific paradigms are constantly changing. That doesn't mean we're going to flip from ancient to thousands of years or anything necessarily, but you look at all the major scientific paradigms of the last 5 centuries, and they have been flipped on their heads. And so I just hold to a science open-handedly. When I look at the stars, I'm like, yeah, that's 97 light years away. That's 10 billion light years long. I'm okay with that until maybe some other data comes in and this proves to be something else entirely. I have up on the screen just one example in the constellation of Hercules. That big star there is the spot in the galaxy where the largest known structure in the universe exists. It's called the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall. It is a wall that astronomers have discovered in 2012 that is 10 billion light years long. It's a 10 billion light year long string of gamma ray bursts or quasars. I forgot now. Let me see what it is. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I didn't put it in here. Did I? No, let's see.
Right.
But I have learned astronomy tells us that things exist beyond our naked eye observations and beyond our limited expectations. That's one thing that it's exciting about astronomy. People are always discovering cool stuff. And that's what I love about it, reading exciting discoveries and what they mean for modern cosmology.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. We're finding out a whole lot more than we ever thought possible. A lot of things that have long been thought to be true have been proven to be true. The gravitational waves, the bounds and leaps that we're making in that area is really exciting.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, it is. I've lost your audio there, Jim, or it's really soft.
I don't know what's going on. Is this better?
I mean, I can hear you, but it sounds like the mic is off.
Maybe it's wrong. Oh wait. Okay, let's
let's
try that. Is that any better?
No, I mean,
No,
I
that's
can
not
hear
any
you.
better.
I can hear you. It sounds like you're talking with your mic off.
I don't know, to be completely honest with you.
But I can hear you well enough to have you still talk to me.
Okay, let me try something. Okay, what about now?
Mm.
No. What about now?
No,
Oh, geez. Now is that any
sorry.
better? Maybe a little bit.
No, it just sounds like your mic is off. There is a mic on. It must be your computer mic or something.
No, it's my. It is my mic, but I don't know what's going on with it. Maybe. Uh, I don't know.
But I can still hear you as long as your audience can hear you. I can still hear you.
I hope my audience can hear me. I guess I should check the live chat. That would probably be
See if
beneficial.
anybody's yelling at you.
Oh, they said it's actually better now. This.
Okay.
Okay, well, I must have really sucked before. So.
Well, you can hear me still, right?
Oh yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Oh, Cy Gart's in the live chat. Hi, Cy. Thank you so much for
Hello,
coming by.
Sai.
I do
I
too.
would
He's
wave to
awesome.
you, but you can't see me.
Well, actually, they can. I have a little PNG cutout of you keeping me company.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I guess.
Do you have anything else to present, or was that
No, I didn't want to like monopolize. I was going to go with your mustache questions. I want to
Oh,
keep
okay.
your
Yeah, I would
questions.
love to ask a couple if you don't mind.
Yeah, you can drive the train. I tend to take over. I don't want to do that.
Okay. So we kind of talked about young Earth and old Earth, and you said that you don't really hold to a date, but there's such a large span. I think I'm probably justified in asking you which way you lean, because is it 6 to 10,000, or is it we talking billions of years?
It's hard because I really do like I said, when I do stargazing and consider astronomical distances and sizes of stars and distances to galaxies and light year distances, I it seems like the light being the speed that it is, there's really no other solution other than these things are indeed as far away as they seem to be. I do know from talking to Dr. Kokomore that the farther away something is, the harder it is to get a pinpoint on it. And
Absolutely.
as I understand it right now, there are only 19 or 20 galaxies where astronomers have found Cepheid variables and supernovas. So those are the two basic standard candle ways that which we measure distances. So if there's 400 or 500 billion galaxies in the universe, who knows how many there are? We only have a sample size of distance measuring sticks of 19. So they work, but you're sort of adding a tape measure to a tape measure to a tape measure to a stepladder to a tape measure. The farther out you go,
Right.
it's always plus and minus. But for the most part, when you do astronomy, it seems like the light is old. But when I read in scripture, it does seem like the universe isn't that old. So here's where it boils down to for me, Jim. And I'm sorry if this is not if this sounds non-committal or dodgy, but in John 8, Jesus is told by the Pharisees, before Abraham, Jesus says to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, before Abraham was, I am. And they're like, what? You're not yet 50 years old, and yet you've seen Abraham? And he says to them, before Abraham was, I am. And so if you were to ask, how old is Jesus in the body? He's 33. As God, he is the Ancient of Days. And if the universe reflects his invisible attributes, then I think it will seem both imminent, like present day, like if I look at the light of Saturn, it's happening right now, but also ancient and transcendent. So it seems to at once have this unusual paradoxical situation of being immediate. Like when I look at stars, it's mind-boggling to think I'm looking back in time.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the science, I am. And when you're looking at Jesus, you're looking at somebody in the body who's only 30 years old, but you're also talking to a person, the second person of the Trinity, who is the Ancient of Days. And so at once you have this mystery of the incarnate Jesus in a body bound to time, who is also the timeless Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end, without beginning and without end, the Ancient of Days. And how those two fit together is a great mystery. And I think the time paradox, for me, that's where I sort of leave it. It's as paradoxical to me as trying to figure out how old Jesus is. technically.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I just think we have to. I mean, as a Christian, I knew that I had to be careful in the way that I would interpret certain things because of the knowledge of the development of the Christology of Jesus throughout the Synoptic Gospels, and then additionally in the Gospel of John, and how there was this development of divinity. We don't see things like Jesus calling himself "I am" or God or anything like that until John. Just as a little addendum.
Yeah, I think I'm probably old fashioned, but not being a textual critic scholar, I think that the theory that is there starts from Mark being sort of like the beginning, more like the guy who painted Lascaux Cave, sort of a very primitive, quick, short, down and dirty. Um, this is kind of who Jesus is to a sort of a it's sort of a literary critical evolutionary development of the Gospels, or of
Hmm.
who Jesus was, that goes from primitive Mark to high John. And I know I'm not entirely familiar with the whole school of higher criticism, but I think that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm in the old-fashioned opinion that Matthew came first and was written in Hebrew, and then Luke and Mark maybe borrowed from them or something. But I think the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the way we have them, is the way that they were written in the order that the church had put them, because Matthew somehow had precedence. Does that mean he was written first? I don't know. But I think the order and the attestation don't necessarily talk about. I mean, John is completely. If you think of three wavelengths or four wavelengths of light, you have X-ray, gamma ray, ultraviolet, and John is sort of like a different wavelength of light. They're all different wavelengths of light reflecting the same person, but just at a different wavelength, a different frequency. And so John
Yeah.
is much more focused on the divinity of Christ.
But,
Matthew,
but to
Mark,
me,
and
it's
Luke, the
almost
synoptics.
it's almost to the level of willful dishonesty, though, just because of the amount of trouble he goes through to put him going through the same things as the Passover lamb and being killed on the same day and so on and so forth. I feel like he goes through a lot of unnecessary and unjustified measures to make his position seem justified or more compelling when I mean it. I believe in the historical Jesus, and if there was a Jesus who did work miracles, I would see no reason to interpolate it in the text just to make it seem a little bit better.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just my position. It's like leave good enough alone, or
I understand. I think, with John, if I'm sure I don't mean to talk down to your
oh,
biblical
not at
knowledge, because I
all.
know your study is, so I just don't know. But I think with John, he opens with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Of course, he's going back to Genesis. And you're familiar with the Genesis of when God creates the stars, he creates them for signs and for seasons and for days and for years.
Yes,
And so what I think John is doing is there's a
and for
lot of,
beauty and to look at,
what's that?
and for beauty to look at.
Yeah. The John is focused on, I mean, First John 1:5, God is light. And then one of my favorite verses, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not comprehend or overwhelm or master it. And I think that's not only about astronomy, but just about the enigma of Jesus, the creator of the world, coming into our world. But John's gospel is filled with light, and he's also focused on signs, the semeions. And of course, the first one is the wedding at Cana, where it was, he transformed water into wine. And I like to use that passage when we talk about the age of the earth questions about, I could see Christians at the table arguing about how old the wine is, because good wine is aged wine, right? But it seems like he made it in an instant. So how old is the wine? And you get into that sort of thing again. But it's a sign that points to who Jesus is. And John is all about signs, the semeions, and Jesus being the light of the world. In John 8:12, I think you see that as well, that Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And so it is very much tied back to the Genesis text of light and light for signs and for seasons and things of that nature. That's just my take on John. I'm not a biblical scholar, but
Yeah, yeah. No worries at all. As far as Genesis go, what is your position as far as creation goes? 6 literal days or 6 eons?
I think there's a lot of debate with that. I personally am okay with and am rest. I rest in literal 6 days because of where the way in which it is conveyed through the giving of the commandments. In 6 days, the Lord your God made the heavens and the earth and rested on the seventh. And I think and I'm not. I don't. I, I hate to argue about it with people, but I believe in six literals.
Hmm.
But that doesn't, without pinning myself down to thousands or a certain chronology, a certain age of the universe. But yeah, I'm six literals on one there.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, well, I'm not gonna push on that or anything. I don't want you to think
No, that's fine.
I'm like
I don't.
gonna hammer on you or whatever. So Adam and Eve, literal Adam and Eve as well.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. It's really interesting. Um, hmm. What about the whole the two? Are you aware of the two different Genesis accounts, the creation accounts? One in chapter 1 through verses 1 through 2 3. Well, actually,
Hmm.
it's through like 2 1 or 2 2, and then 2 3 is an interpolation, and two
Right.
four is the start of a new creation narrative.
Yeah. No, I think that what you have, the ancient Near East cosmology of the ancient Hebrews is such a different world than ours. I mean, if we were transplanted back then, it would seem like we were on another planet.
Oh, no
And
doubt.
I think what we're seeing, because I love Genesis, but I think what we're seeing is just a macrocosmic view in one, and then a zoom down. God comes down and plants the garden, and so we get a narrowed in view of the details of God's creation of man. And so I know there's some chronological, sequential issues that people bring up in terms of a contradiction, but I don't think that the people that I don't Moses that time frame, like in our world, we are so lockstep, linear, point A, point B, point C, point D, all the way to the end, no interruption, no backstory, no. We like a nice, neat, and linear sort of progressive historical chronology. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Don't go back and deviate.
Hmm.
And I don't think the writer of Genesis, who I believe is Moses, I don't think that they were so concerned about the strict literal chronology that the details I'm thinking of specifically, the differences in the chapter 1 versus the chapter 2 narratives. I don't think that's really problematic. I think what's probably the most problematic is our modernistic assumptions about reading text. I mean, I'm an English teacher, and one of the things I always tell the kids is you got to get into the mindset of the time and the culture of the story that you're reading.
Absolutely.
And
Authorial context is incredibly important, especially if you're trying to
yeah,
derive any sort of intent from it.
absolutely. I think you're doing a disservice to the text if you can't do that. No, not to say that I'm
100%.
I'm an expert in ancient Near Eastern texts, but having poured through Genesis so many times in
I,
over the course
I,
of my life, with my love of science, I've completely reconciled. At least I have explanations that for myself that I'm satisfied with, even though that there may be things I just don't know. Why this way or why that way, but I think they are I can allow for certain things to be the way they are simply as a gap in our cultural understanding of their time and our cultural assumptions of our time. I think that's where a lot of the problems come into being.
yeah, yeah, no doubt. I couldn't couldn't agree with you more. But I like how you thought you were just gonna like sneak in Mosaic authorship on me, just kind of just under your breath there. Just
No, I don't mind talking about it. I think he did.
he's like, which I think
My
Moses wrote, but we're gonna keep going.
No, 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 no. My whole thing with Moses is, and this is just more my colloquial thing with it. I'd
Like
like, look, if
traditional.
you tell me Moses didn't write it, okay. But I think what I like to say to that is that, well, if you know that Moses didn't write it, then to me, that means that if Moses wrote something, you would recognize what Moses wrote, not necessarily you per se, but when a scholar says, we know Moses didn't write that, or we don't know that Moses wrote this or whatever, to me, that suggests tacitly that you know what something that Moses had written would look like to be able to compare it. Having graded a lot of middle school and high school essays over the course of my life, I know that's not Susan's writing. I
Mm,
know that's not John's writing. I know that is John's writing. I know that is Susan's writing because I've spent hours and hours poring over your papers for the last semester. and I can identify so and so's writing, his handwriting, his style, his narrative, and I can tell when he's cheating, and I can tell when he's copied something.
Mm.
And so when you get into the text criticism and you say not Moses, not John, not Peter, not Paul, whatever, to me that always, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, well, then we must have a schematic by which we are measuring what a genuine Peter
Yes.
epistle would look like, what a genuine Paul epistle would look like, what genuine Moses handwriting would look like.
Well,
And I think you got to realize that, I think for me, this is just for me, Moses was in, if the story is true, Moses was in the court, high official royal Egyptian court, familiar with Hebrew writing, familiar with the law tracts of the ancient Near East, familiar with law documents, familiar with legal writing, could write. He was brought up as a pharaoh, in the pharaoh's household, so he was probably given an excellent education. So he wasn't just some backwater dude that was running around through the desert with sheep. I mean, the man had an education through the best, empire of the time. So it's very plausible to me that Moses was capable of writing the Pentateuch.
Well, so first I want to say that when it comes to textual criticism, it's not, when it comes to establishing authorship, it's not just as simple as comparing 12 different children from the same class who grow up in the same social constructs.
Oh, I know that. I'm just simplifying it.
Right,
Yes,
right,
I
right.
agree.
So I mean, we have evidence of things in there such as the domestication of camels. We have things in there where they are using different words for the same word that it's used the same way elsewhere. We can see that there is a Levitical tradition, Deuteronomical tradition, and some people hold to the four source hypothesis. I personally don't. I rule out two of them, three, I guess, if I'm being honest with myself. But oh, and also with when it comes to Moses, most biblical scholars are actually questioning whether or not he even existed, just because of the parallels you have of his life and the narrative of him being placed in a reed basket covered in pitch and being floated down the river and being saved by royalty is virtually the same story of Sargon of Akkad. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not.
Somewhat.
Yeah, and so he has the exact same narrative from, I believe like 500 years earlier. And then you get the problem of, like, Moses talking about his own death and nobody knowing where Moses' grave is.
Well, it would seem that you could allow for Joshua to take over.
Well, yeah, but when they're talking about it, they say the way they're talking about it is like they're looking at it from far in the future, like it was some oral tradition, and they say, but nobody knows where the grave is to this day.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure that there were things where, if Joshua took over, that he could have gone back and written things. But I don't, I haven't done my my exegetical study in Genesis in a while. I'd have to go back and take a look.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No worries. So reading in your book, you quoted Robert Williams, is one of my favorite people. And I had to go and watch the interview, which was hard as heck to find. It was like Russia Today or something like that.
Yes, it's kind of obscure.
It was. I'm so surprised you
it.
found that.
I did research.
No kidding. But he said that the beauty of the universe is in the mind of the beholder, and how great it was that that for a scientist, that beauty is a totally different thing. But he thought that the fact that the Hubble produced these beautiful images that children like to see is very important for the funding of Hubble and for the future of astronomy. And he said that it's of course important for scientists.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what do you the beauty of the universe? I mean, that's it's a subjective value that we place upon it. But I would feel comfortable saying that most people would see beauty in the universe. But I think it's more of a marvel than it is a beauty. It's looking at something that's so different from anything that we're used to, that we can see it, and yet at the same time we know nothing about it.
I think for me, Jim, I think that beauty, and I say this, I've learned it through my own suffering. and learning to be thankful for the trials that I've gone through. But beauty is intricately tied to humility, because to really see beauty where everybody else is seeing ugliness. And I guess I learned this as a teacher, dealing with very difficult students, one of them being myself. But when you overcome, I talk a little bit about in the chapter, I talk a little bit about pride and prejudice. I mentioned that story for a reason, because Darcy and Elizabeth have to overcome their pride and their prejudice to have the relationship that they do. And I think it's the human condition that we all struggle with, whatever we believe, that we have certain pride, a certain amount of pride and a certain amount of prejudice, to where we would rather hold on to that than see something through the eyes of a child. And so that's why I combine those two things, especially the mention of the children, because it is through children that Jesus commends the kingdom to us. And it's through their humility, their innocence. And I think the best kind of telescope for seeing true beauty is to be seen through humility and brokenness. And I know Bob Williams went through a lot with taking a risk in doing the Hubble dark field that got the deep field. He spent 10
Sure.
days taking a picture of dark sky after Hubble just failed.
Yeah.
So he was taking a huge risk with the telescope.
And that
he
was
a pioneer in that.
That was the last time, right?
Huh? Yeah, right. But Bob, he knows. I know he I think it was in that interview. I didn't put it in the book, but I think it was in that video interview that you found, that he said he was willing to fall on his sword for what he did with the deep field image in 1995. And he took a huge risk. He had some discretionary time as telescope director, but there was a man who overcame his pride and prejudice and his professionalism, worrying about what people think. He took a risk. He knew it could have been a disaster, and that it took guts. But to get back to your point about beauty, I think the way I perceive it, the way I've really seen beauty, especially through some of my most difficult students I've ever had. One time, my last teaching job, I had a guy who was just a complete knucklehead the whole year. And when I left school, he came up to me, asked me if I could take a picture with me, and gave me a hug. I just was in tears. I could not believe it. I did not know that all year, I did not know that he held me in that kind of a regard. And I was a broken man for a while about that. And it taught me a great deal about perceiving on the surface, which is what, astronomy has also taught me, is that there is so much more that transcends what we see than what we see on the surface. Man looks at the outward appearance of everything, but God looks at the heart. And I think in order to see true beauty, that you must step down and see life as a child. And that's what suffering has taught me. It's a hard lesson to talk about, but that's where I still hold on to, what your daughter is experiencing right now, the childlike delight in the universe, the childlike delight of just going out and looking at the stars, and just resting in that and just delighting it like I'm 5 again.
Well, it's just it's just the awe of it. I mean, if we go back what was it, 700 years ago, we didn't really know anything past Uranus. I mean, we have 14th century texts where the model of the universe is geocentric, and it goes out in like 9 different layers, and then that's the universe, and that's right. Kind of how I see it through the eyes of my daughter. I don't think that she can fully grasp. I mean, I can't even fully grasp, but I try, to explain it to her, and she just soaks up this information. She does her own independent reading on it, and just awesome. Soaks it up. But it's something that you can never portray. It's something that you can only discover yourself.
Right. It is a true kind of self-discovery, that you can go through the steps of a formal education, but like anything else, Jim, whether you're an atheist activist or whether you're a Christian, how do you live that out? how are you taking responsibility for what it is that you're telling people? And that is the hardest lesson I learned as a teacher. Am I just giving them knowledge? Because if all I'm doing is just giving them facts, then they can just look the stuff up on a computer. But there's an incarnate necessity that takes place in education that is totally relational. And, your relationship with your daughter is invaluable. She's just soaking it up and she loves it. And that's the kind of passion that I think for me as a Christian that Jesus encourages us to have constantly, and we can have constantly, that childlike wonder and awe about what God has done for us. And that's been the delight and the thing that has given me the ability to persevere throughout. Is your daughter familiar with the Pleiades? Does she know how to identify this star pattern?
Oh
by any
yeah.
chance?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I thought it's an aside if you want to go down the road. I mentioned the Pleiades in my book. I thought we could talk about it if you wanted to. If not, no,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
your show. I don't want to. Okay, so
You
can
got
you
a
see
slide
the
on it?
Pleiades on the screen? Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I can see it. Everybody else can too.
Okay, so this is the Pleiades constellation. It's not a constellation, it's an asterism. It's in the constellation of Taurus. And Taurus, the V, is called the Hyades cluster. It looks like a V, but it's in the constellation of Taurus, the bull. So it's an asterism. It's a star pattern, star cluster inside a constellation. But I want to talk about the different ways in which the Pleiades have been known throughout history. And this year, I've learned their star names this past year, and these are the 6 visible ones. So if you go out, it's up in the mornings before sunrise right now in the northern hemisphere. If you go out, these are the 6 stars that you can see with the naked eye: Atlas, Alcyon, Merope, Electra, Maia, and Tagetes. And you can see it looks like a little Amazon.com shopping basket just to the west of the Hyades, the V in Taurus. You find Orion, the V in Taurus, and then just behind Taurus is the little star cluster of the Pleiades. So those are the 6 sisters. There's another one, Seleno, but you can't see that with the naked eye. You can see all that in the telescope. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they've been around obviously for centuries, but that is the star cluster on the Subaru. I didn't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
Some people do, some people don't. Yeah, Subaru is a Japanese auto manufacturer. It means unity. And so that's why they chose it for their emblem. It means unity. And it's kind of a fitting for our book, because for a time, we Christians were unified in coming together for this book project. So here, if you own a Subaru, here's just some trivia for you. Here's the stars. The Atlas is the big one. And then it goes the 3 across the top: Alcyon, Maia, and Tagetes. And then the 2 on the bottom: Merope and Electra. So the Subaru star cluster, Subaru car company, was named after the star cluster. Now, here's some ways in which the Pleiades have been recognized throughout centuries. This is Aratus, the very poet to which Paul appeals in Acts 17:28, as some of your own poets have said. This is from the 3rd century BC. These 7 names they bear, and he lists the names of the Pleiades, but they're all there from 3rd century BC. The names go back that far. The names that we have today are there in the 3rd century in Aratus. He's talking about this, and of course, he's referencing Zeus. His whole poem that Paul references is a paean to Zeus, a praise to Zeus, and so Paul borrows that and uses it for Jesus. And then Hesiod in the 8th century. You go back to the 700s, about the time of Homer and Isaiah. Hesiod mentions the Pleiades. When the Atlas born, the Pleiades stars arise before the sun above the dawning skies, time to reap. And when they sink below the morning illumined west, it is time to sow. So not only are these things beautiful, they were entirely practical. And, even in the 8th century here, there's this tradition of the rising and the setting, the heliacal rising before sunrise, and the setting in the west in the springtime of planting and harvesting. You kept your eye on the Pleiades to know when to plant and to harvest. And of course, this reminds me of what Genesis says: the stars are for signs and for seasons. Mm-hmm. And then God says in Genesis 8, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So the Pleiades are not only beautiful, they inspire poetry, and they're useful for agriculture. They're on a car manufacturer here in the 21st century. And then they're mentioned in the book of Job, in Job chapter 38. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? These things have been around as long as man has been staring at the skies. Yeah. And then there's from Alfred Lloyd Tennyson's Locksley Hall in 1835, one of the most famous poems ever written about the Pleiades. He's talking about the constellation there. So then you have the science of the sisters. And you have, these are just some basic scientific facts. Then you have the magnitude and the spectrum class of each of the stars. And number two, Alcyon, is 10 times bigger than our sun. That's the brightest magnitude of the group right there. But you can get an idea that if Alcyon is 10 times bigger than our sun, the rest of them are about 5, 6, 7, 8 times bigger than our sun as well. So we're looking at things that are 10 times the size of our sun, which is 864,000 miles in diameter. You can string 109 Earths across the diameter of our sun. So these are giant stars in addition to being beautiful. So you have Subaru, you have Hesiod, Homer, Aratus, and Tennyson, and Subaru, and agriculture, and astronomy, and scripture all coming together. And this is exactly what I think what the Psalm says. Their line has gone out throughout the whole world. Of course, Homer, I
It's
didn't
possible, yeah.
have it all the way in.
Yeah, it's very well possible. I mean, this is something that was being able to see with the naked eye. I mean, something that probably goes back to Mesopotamian, perhaps even Sumerian.
Oh yeah. And these are just some stargazing things. I have a ton of stuff. I don't know where you want to go, so I won't push it on you if you don't want to see it. You just can keep asking questions.
I love star stuff. Do you mind if I ask another question? Maybe we can segue into something else.
Okay, sure.
Okay, let's see. Here's a good one. Do you find the Kalam cosmological argument to be a good argument for a particular God?
It was, as I understand it, it's about 1,000 years old. And the gentleman who made it was a Muslim cleric. And it was a refutation of some people that were theologically making some theological assertions or something. I don't know exactly the history of it, but for a particular, I've always thought it kind of peculiar that, we're fond of the argument as Christians, given that it was from a Muslim cleric. I mean, okay, because you can obviously say that this seems to have been what he meant for Allah. But I think the basic underlying logic is sound, but I don't think that the syllogism itself leads you directly to Jesus. No.
So I'm getting a question.
If that's what you were getting at.
I'm sorry?
If that's what I assume that's what you were getting at. How does a Christian take the Kalam to Christ? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Just I think it's maybe a good argument for deism, but I've just been of the mind that it's not a good argument Jim. For any one God.
Right, I agree. It's philosophical theism. I think that's your cash value of that. I think it's useful for that.
We have a question from the live chat, if you don't mind. It's relevant.
I don't mind.
Frustrated atheist asks if I would ask you if you believe that the Bible is just a retelling of the constellations. Apparently, there's a discussion in the live chat about that.
The Bible is the retelling of constellations. I'm not sure what the.
So, like the 12, the significance of the 12.
Oh, I see. So the zodiac as
7.
gospel stories.
Well, just the Bible in general, like you were relaying, the early Psalm and early Ezekiel text, Job, and things of that nature.
So my take on that is that obviously I believe God created the stars for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And so all the 12, the zodiac it comes from the Greek word for zoo. And all it is the star patterns that follow along the ecliptic, the line of the sun and the moon and the planets along the highway of the planets that we see toward the southern hemisphere.